The Nexus Arena materialized around Marcus Chun like a fever dream of crystalline architecture and impossible geometries. Ancient beings from across 17 galaxies had gathered for the millennial Tournament of the Gods, a contest where civilizations sent their most powerful representatives to compete for cosmic supremacy. The winner species would gain dominion over entire star systems and the coveted right to shape universal law for the next 1,000 years. Marcus stood among titans. To his left, Veltar the Destroyer wielded matter itself, casually reshaping the arena floor into obsidian spikes with a thought. The crystalline Zephyron delegate pulsed with pure energy that could atomize planets. Behind him, a shadow-reed entity from the Void Realms whispered reality into new configurations. Each competitor represented eons of evolution, divine ascension, or technological transcendence beyond mortal comprehension. And then there was Marcus, a 34-year-old electrical engineer from Detroit who had been selected by humanities. First contact protocol not for supernatural abilities, but for something the selection committee couldn't quite articulate. The human, Archon Dizes announced, her voice resonating across dimensions, will compete in the preliminary trial, the crucible of infinite adversity. The arena transformed. Marcus found himself facing a labyrinth that stretched beyond the horizon, filled with challenges that had broken the minds of lesser gods. Temporal loops where participants aged centuries in moments. Gravity wells that compressed matter into singularities. Psychological mazes that turned beings' greatest strengths against them. The other competitors launched themselves into the crucible with displays of raw power that rewrote physics. Veltar punched through dimensional barriers. The Zephyrin delegate became living lightning, racing through the maze at light speed. The void entities simply ceased to exist in troublesome sections. Reappearing beyond obstacles, Marcus walked out. He approached the first challenge, a wall of pure entropy that dissolved anything touching it, while others had blasted through or phased. Around it, Marcus stood before the barrier and began to calculate. He pulled out a battered notebook and started sketching equations, mapping the entropy field's fluctuation patterns. Fascinating, he murmured to himself. It's not random at all. There's a mathematical elegance here. Hours passed. Other competitors had already completed multiple sections, while Marcus remained at the first obstacle. The cosmic audience grew. Restless. Some laughed at the primitive human with his paper and pencil, but Marcus found it a harmonic frequency in the entropy field's oscillation. He began to hum, a simple melody that matched the mathematical rhythm he discovered. The wall of dissolution ... paused, then began to resonate with his tune. The entropy didn't stop destroying. Instead, it began destroying in harmony, creating brief windows of stability that Marcus stepped through as easily as walking through a door. The laughter stopped. The second challenge was a gravity maze where directions became meaningless and space folded in on itself. Competitors had been using brute force or exotic abilities to navigate it. Marcus sat down at the entrance and began mapping gravitational currents, weather patterns. He noticed something others had missed. The maze wasn't trying to trap them. It was trying to teach them. You're lonely, aren't you? Marcus said to the maze itself. All these eons, and everyone just fights their way through. No one stops to understand. The gravitational field shifted, not to crush him, but to communicate. Marcus began a conversation with the maze, learning its patterns not through conquest, but through comprehension. It guided him to its heart, where he found not an exit, but a revelation. The maze was a living entity, created by an ancient civilization to preserve their knowledge. Knowledge that Marcus now carried forward. By the third challenge, the other competitors had begun watching him instead of racing ahead. The trial presented them with their greatest fears made manifest. Veltar faced the heat death of his universe. The Zephyrin confronted the entropy of all energy. The void entity was forced to exist in absolute light. Marcus faced a simple suburban home, his childhood home. Inside, he could hear the arguments, the breaking glass, the sound of his mother crying. His greatest fear wasn't cosmic annihilation. It was the memory of powerlessness, of being a small boy who couldn't fix his family's pain. But instead of running or fighting, Marcus sat on the porch steps and began to cry. He let himself feel the old wounds, acknowledged the scared child he'd been. And in that moment of absolute vulnerability, the fear construct began to change. The house became warm. The arguments turned to laughter. The simulation showed him not what had been, but what could be healed. The fear trial dissolved not through conquering, but through acceptance. As Marcus completed the crucible, he wasn't first, he was last. But something unprecedented happened. The trials he passed began changing for those who came after. The entropy wall started humming songs. The gravity maze began teaching instead of testing. The fear constructs offered healing rather than trauma. Impossible, Archon Dizes whispered. The crucible has stood unchanged for 50 million years. Marcus looked up at the assembled gods and cosmic entities. Maybe it was waiting for someone who didn't want to conquer it. The tournament continued, but its nature had fundamentally altered. Each subsequent trial began responding to empathy rather than power, to understanding rather than domination. Competitors found themselves collaborating instead of competing, learning from challenges instead of simply overcoming them. When the final trial concluded not with a single winner, but with all participants having grown beyond their original limitations, the Archon made an announcement that would echo across the universe. For the first time in cosmic history, the Tournament of the Gods recognizes not victory through power, but transformation through wisdom. The human species is granted not dominion over others, but the responsibility to teach what they have learned. Marcus Chun returned to Earth not as a conqueror, but as a translator helping humanity understand that true power wasn't the ability to impose one's will upon the universe, but the capacity to listen to what the universe was trying to teach. Tournament of the Gods continued to exist, but it had become something new, not a contest to determine who was strongest, but a celebration of how much each species could grow. And at its heart, written in mathematics and hummed in harmonies that spanned dimensions, was a simple human truth that sometimes the greatest strength was knowing when not to fight. In the end, Marcus had redefined power forever by showing the cosmos something it had forgotten, that understanding was infinitely more powerful than domination, and that the greatest victories came not from conquering others, but from helping them become more than they had ever imagined possible.